Over the past month, I've heard countless reviewers give their opinions on Myth Wukong, with each of them saying different things. Some say it's a Souls-like, while others say it's not. Many people complain about the performance, while others said it was completely fine. Regardless, I saw the trailers and knew that I wanted to play this, but was unsure of what my experience would be, since there were so many conflicting opinions. Nevertheless, I'm so glad I decided to buy Myth Wukong and give it a shot, because it's one of the best games to drop this year.
See that temple on the lake? Therein lies the thing you seek. The lord of this land is away. Seize it now and leave.
Diving headfirst into the most important aspect of this game, the gameplay is what makes Myth Wukong so much fun. When looking at the trailers, it seems like it's another Souls-like game, so if you saw one of those and thought the same thing, then I wouldn't blame you. However, when I started to actually play this, I realized that that wasn't the case. Yes, there are plenty of elements that you can see were inspired from Souls games, like the shrines and the stamina meter, but overall this game is not a Souls-like, unless you make it one. To explain, this game incentivizes you on exploring and finding items or defeating bosses that give you items needed to upgrade your stats. Depending on the type of item you get, you'll be able to take that to an NPC and exchange it for an upgrade. Now, because the game is set up like this, it makes all of this completely optional, meaning that if you wanted to, you could play this entire game without upgrading a single thing. You may see this as a good thing or as a bad thing. If you like playing games with the hardest difficulty possible, then you may love this level of flexibility. But if you're someone used to automatic upgrades, then this may be a tough pill to swallow. Either way, I thought that the direction this game pointed you towards was to find as many bosses as possible and collect all the materials necessary so you could upgrade. This is how I went about my playthrough, and it paid huge dividends. Upgrading your health, mana, and stamina all allow you to handle the fights as the difficulty in the game ramps up as you progress from chapter to chapter. After recently playing Dark Souls 1 and 2, I definitely don't think this game is a one-to-one Souls-like game. In those games, you might die in 1 to 3 hits and have a lot less options at your disposal in regards to healing, while in Wukong you can take a good amount of hits before death, along with more variety in terms of the gameplay. So to answer the question, is Myth Wukong a Souls-like? Personally, I would say it's not. It takes elements from Souls games and inserts them into an action game. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The performance. Now, I mentioned earlier that I knew I was going to pick up this game, but the biggest issue with my decision was I didn't know where I was going to play it. Do I play it on PS5 or do I play it on PC? When people started playing the game, I heard there was issues on both platforms, so it made this decision even more difficult. But in the end, I ended up going with PS5 because that's where I play most of my games anyway. Unfortunately, that was definitely the wrong decision. The performance on PS5 was not good at all. Yes, the game worked and was in a playable state, but visually it was scuffed. Instantly, right from the opening, the game was dropping frames while the cinematics were on, and then once I got into the gameplay, the first thing I noticed was how grainy it was. Once you get past the intro, you can see pop-ins with certain things in the distance, along with this weird effect that happens when you spin the camera. It's like a light shadow of the character comes out from all sides when you turn the camera fast. It's actually the weirdest thing. So many times during the combat, the frames would drop and end up getting me killed. And this was in performance mode. The frames held steady while finding smaller enemies, but it's when there was a lot on the screen or facing against large bosses that the frames would just plummet. When they dipped during these large boss fights, it was the absolute worst because this game relies on the dodge mechanic, so it can mess up your timing completely. I tried the other two graphics modes, but the slight upgrade in visuals wasn't worth the decrease in frames. Although I will say that as bad as the performance is, you will adjust to it. Eventually. You may not like it, but if you go with the performance mode and get adjusted to this level of performance, then it does make the game easier to play. Regardless, even with its issues, I would say playing this on PC would be the best decision. The PC version has problems as well, but it would still run better than on PS5, which is a shame because this isn't the first notable title that can't run 1440p 60 FPS on console, but I digress. Now that I've gone through the two biggest topics surrounding this game, I wanted to dive into the actual gameplay on a more granular level. The combat in this game is very addicting. At first it doesn't seem like much, but once you get used to the overall flow of how the fights go, it gets really fun. You do press the same button over and over again to perform light attacks, but it actually makes sense because you do that in order to build up your heavy attack. These heavy attacks are arguably the most important mechanic in the game, because I think it's the best method of attack that you can use. To explain, you fill up multiple focus circles on the right side of your screen, which add to the power of your charge attack. The attack itself differs based on the stance that you choose to use. For my playthrough, I used the thrust stance, which essentially allows you to shove your pole right up each enemy's On top of this being strong, I liked how fluid the entire motion of this attack was. The other stances were cool, but I thought they took too long to perform. Whichever stance you choose in combat is completely up to you, but regardless you have the option to upgrade certain characteristics which improve them. Just like almost everything else, upgrading these cost sparks which you would earn by leveling up from defeating enemies. The more you upgrade stance abilities, the more focus circles you would get, meaning the more powerful the attack would become. Honestly, the entire upgrade system was really well done. The devs really put a lot of effort into letting you upgrade everything that can help you in combat, even giving you the ability to reset your build without any penalty. All of this upgrading was to get prepared for one thing: the boss fights, and for a game that's focus is the boss fights, it most certainly delivers. For a title with so many of them, most of the bosses felt unique, and the ones that didn't were slight variations of other ones which made sense given the situation. I loved how bosses lined up with the environment that the chapter took place in or where the animal would actually reside in real life. Like in chapter 2, you fight this electric frog, but the frog isn't found in the middle of a bed of lava, but rather in a pond, where you would find a frog in real life. Little details like this help make it seem like the placement of these bosses were actually thought out, and they weren't just thrown into any random place to pad out the chapter. Furthermore, the actual fights themselves were challenging. Now, not every fight is difficult, but there are a handful that have me raging. Honestly, I thought this game was easy until I faced a certain boss called the Yellow Wind Sage. This stupid Walmart version of Master Splinter was the bane of my existence. I just kept dying over and over and over. It wasn't until after the fight that one of my friends told me there was an item that I could have used to make that fight easier, and that fight was back in chapter 2. Many of these fights require you to learn the boss's attack patterns because just mashing square will definitely get you killed. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet that you can't even get out of chapter 1 without understanding how to dodge properly. The dodge itself is easy to perform, but hard to master. Dodging a basic attack from a smaller enemy requires almost no effort, but when trying to dodge the boss's attacks, those are the ones that require some thought. This would be one aspect of the game where it leans more into the Souls aspect, as you have to dodge these attacks, or you will die. A lot. Luckily, this game is a lot more fluid and fast than Dark Souls, and perfect dodges reward you with additional focus that will stack during battle. Unfortunately, it's not all perfect as the camera inhibits your ability to dodge sometimes. This issue appears when fighting the large bosses, the ones that take up most of your screen. So many times I would fight these guys and lose track of where I was or what I was hitting. What's even worse is when these bosses do attacks that require large windups, because this brings the camera closer, making it extremely hard to see, and combined with the frame drops, my eyes just start spazzing out. If the camera was just a bit more consistent when a whole bunch of stuff was happening, it would have been so much better. Another aspect I really enjoyed was the exploration. Throughout each chapter, they throw you in a giant area with a whole bunch of different paths that you can go, with one of them being the one that progresses the story. When exploring, you're bound to run into a whole slew of bosses, with most of them offering valuable items that will help you on your quest. To my surprise, there are side quests within each chapter that you can do which will take you on a short journey, have you meeting NPCs, finding treasure, and fighting bosses. Most importantly, by completing these you can acquire specific items that will help you drastically in the boss fights, as I mentioned earlier. So to put it simply, it's in your interest to explore as much as possible. I will say though, the lack of a map did hinder the exploration a bit. There was definitely things I missed simply by not knowing it was there. Personally, I don't need a full-fledged detailed map with everything on it, but something small that can just help you find some stuff would definitely have been appreciated. When you look at it in its entirety, the gameplay for Black Myth Wukong is a lot of fun, overshadowed by poor performance. If the game was in a better state, then this gameplay could have been top tier. Instead, it's fun, but flawed. In regards to the story, it's a bit hard to understand if you're not really paying attention. Even if you don't comprehend exactly everything that's going on, all that you need to know is that you play as the Destined One, who's on a journey to recover Wukong's relics that will help to resurrect him. These relics are spread out across regions which serve as the chapters throughout the game, and of course a boss is in possession of each of these relics. But what's more interesting is the story within each chapter. After completing a chapter, you're greeted with a lengthy cutscene that explains exactly what was going on and how things got to where they were. At first it may not seem like anything amazing, but once you start to connect the dots and understand the story, things get really interesting. On the other hand, if you really don't care about any of this, I would get it. The way it's told at first isn't the easiest to latch onto, but that's okay, as it gives the player the ability to focus on what they care about the most. One thing that surprised me about the plot was how the NPCs were weaved into the flow of each chapter. When this game was marketed, I thought we wouldn't encounter anybody at all in between fights, but after playing this, that's simply not the case. Just like countless titles we've played in the past, there's cutscenes that play at certain sections within each chapter, featuring characters that not only serve as bosses, but notable figures within that specific level. It was nice to watch the scenes and listen to the dialogue, as the writing did a solid job at combining both the overall goal of reviving Wukong with what was going on within that chapter. Speaking of dialogue, dialogue, I played this game in both Chinese and English. At first I started on Chinese because it sounded a lot more fluid and natural, but eventually I switched to English. It wasn't because of the voice acting, I just got tired of reading subtitles all the time. Regardless of which audio you choose to listen to the game in, it's going to sound good because the voice acting is solid for both versions. For a game with such a simple story, you'll find yourself caring a lot more about the Destined One than you might think. You understand what Wukong did and why he did it, making you care that much more about using the Destined One to revive him and continue his mission. To sum it up, for a game that appears to be a boss rush sim, there's more to it. It has an intriguing and easy to understand story that anybody can grasp onto. Overall, Black Myth Wukong is a really good game that is burdened with performance issues. I understand that these consoles really aren't powerful enough to handle the games that these devs are creating, but with this game it was just ridiculous. For a game this good to be riddled with visual glitches and frame drops just distracts you from your gameplay experience, and it's a shame because this game is legitimately fun. However, even with the issues, the combat is smooth and the boss fights make the replayability for this game pretty high. So for those reasons, I'm going to give this game an 8. Black Myth Wukong has so much to like, and if game science can build upon this, then I'm all in for a sequel. Everything from the combat to the story is solid, but I simply can't look past the performance issues. Sometimes glitches and frame rate drops do happen, I get it, but in this case it drastically changes your experience playing the game. So if you thought about buying this, I would recommend getting this on PC or waiting a couple months until some more patches have dropped, because this game is definitely worth it, just not in its current state. But if the performance doesn't bother you much, then go ahead and buy it immediately, because you won't regret your purchase. If you played Black Myth Wukong, what did you think about it? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.